Okay, it's 6. Let's go ahead and get started. As usual, we'll start with introductions. Welcome, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm Bob McCluskey, the chairman of the committee.
Hi, good evening. Roger Sherman with CRL Associates. Again, reminder to please use your microphones so that you can hear yourself coming out of the monitor speaker.
Terry Pecora with the Classified Personnel Council from CSU.
Mark Driscoll, representing the CSU alumni.
Carl Wansvik, Campus West.
Karen Weikenat, Mayor of Fort Collins.
Ross Kniff, Fort Collins City Council alternate.
Jerry Schauger, Fort Collins Police.
Doug Brobst, representing Save Our Stadium Hughes.
Alan Lamborn, representing the Shilley neighborhood.
Ann Hunt, representing Wallenberg neighborhood.
Ben Morgan, Ram Club.
Tyler Shannon, B. Bald in support of the stadium.
Mike Harms, Icon Venue Group.
Curtis Rowe, Kimley Horn.
Algin Williams, Populous.
Sandy Limburg.
Chuck Minks.
David Hanson, CSU Facilities.
Martina Wilkinson, City of Fort Collins Traffic Operations.
Mark Jackson, City of Fort Collins Planning, Development, and Transportation.
Diane Jones, City of Fort Collins Senior Policy Manager.
Jean Ewell, Citizen, City of Fort Collins.
Wade Troxel, Fort Collins City Council.
Kelly Lyle, Fort Collins, Colorado.
Scott Sorensen, Kimley Horn.
Liz Cox, Icon Venue Group.
Okay, great. Let's move to the second item on the agenda. Move to the follow-up items for the July meeting. Roger?
Okay. Any comments, changes to the meeting notes? All right, so that's the only item I had. We are here. I think I mentioned September. We are here. So there was a potential conflict, but we've got that, thanks to Diane, straightened out. So we'll be here in September.
Okay, next, the design development update from Populous. Algin?
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Good deal. So at the last meeting, related to the stadium scale diagrams, we had some images with some heights of the stadium, and we've included some additional diagrams this time around, as well as some additional information on the same images. And as you look around the room, we've also printed out some boards that you can reference throughout the presentation. So this first graphic here represents the new stadium, the new on-campus stadium to the right, and the existing Hughes Stadium width, length, and then height from field elevation. And again, I know it's a little hard to read, so to give you an update here, Hughes Stadium, 124 feet from the field, and again, that's to the top of the press box. Our new stadium is 123 feet from the field, again, to that top of the press box, or to the top of the eyebrow of the press box. So again, the new stadium is going to be on the right of all of these slides, and then different buildings in and around CSU's campus and Fort Collins are going to be compared to the size and scale of the stadium for your reference. So again, our new stadium, 618 feet in width, 677 feet in length. I won't go through all of them, but everybody's gonna have a handout that is this same image with all the buildings compared. But again, we compared it to Moby Arena, Yates Hall, Behavioral Sciences. Again, going from left to right, Behavioral Sciences at 65 feet tall, Yates at 84 feet tall, Moby at 80, and then Westfall at 120 feet. And again, that relates to our stadium from the field elevation, again at 123 feet. The next group of buildings is Rockwell Hall at 25 feet. And again, you kind of see in plan, it's about 205 feet wide, 225 feet long. Bradenton Hall, and then College Field House. And again, 36 feet tall and 49 feet tall, respectively. The last couple of buildings that we compared it to in plan and elevation are the First National Bank building and the Hilton of Fort Collins. Again, the First National Bank building at 158 feet tall, to give some comparison, and then the Hilton of Fort Collins at 110 feet tall. So this is a diagram that we did a cross section in the east and west and north and south directions, and that are identified by the yellow lines, how far the section goes. And again, this is really just to give an understanding of how the stadium is going to sit on a section relatively a mile long, if you will, along the skyline of the CSU campus. So all the buildings that you see here, all the different campus buildings, again, whether or not they're cut in the north or south or east or west directions. This is a section through the south side, the south entrance. So again, we have some sandstone pilasters and some foliage that you see, and then the width of Lake Street is identified here where my hand is. So again, you walk from what we'll call grade at the sidewalk of Lake Street. You're going to step up onto what we're calling the South Great Green Plaza, and then that's going to be open with views down to the bowl. And then this section is cut through the scoreboard. So again, that's kind of the size and scale of the scoreboard as it relates to a tree, for example, or the width of Lake Street. And we have some images that go down Lake Street with some additional dimensions that hopefully clarify the scale. This is the section of the North Great Green Plaza. So again, here's the width of Pitkin, the sidewalk, the streetscape, the buffer, if you will, between the built environment and the streetscape. The sandstone pilasters in the North Great Green Plaza. Here's the section, if you will, of the design concept that I've mentioned before with the seating terraces with the natural Colorado foliage kind of sprinkled around. It's a seating inventory element, but again is accessed by and off of this Great Green Plaza. This is a section of the east side. So again, pedestrian walk, buffer zone with some streetscape, the Meridian or Whitcomb extension. The height of the top of the concession buildings from grade, again, about 45 feet, 7 inches, give or take, to the parapet. And again, those dimensions are taken, that grade slopes from high to low as you go from south to north. So that, we'll call that an average dimension, or a dimension taken from the center of that east elevation. And then here's a building section of the west side. Again, we've included a streetscape, which isn't going to be day-to-day vehicles, but it's going to be able to accommodate light trucks and delivery vehicles, pedestrian and parking, some plantings, and then again, you're going to step up to what we're calling the west entry level. This section is really taken at the 50-yard line. So these stairs here and this landing, if you will, accesses the doors that are going to take you into a west entry level. So the dimensions here are to the front side of this canopy structure, or the roof structure of the press box, is 110 feet 9 inches above grade. And again, this thing slopes up, so it's 117 feet 6 inches above grade to the front part, or to the highest point. And that relates to the 125 feet above grade of the images that we saw at the beginning. So we included some 2D elevations that describe a little bit of the grade that you see here. Again, this is the west elevation. The grade, again, on the south side is high. On the north side is low. So these dimensions that I'm talking about, again, are taken really right here at the west entry level. That landing right here that I described in section. Here's the east elevation. Again, from south to north, the grade slopes from high to low side on the north side. And these elements here are the back of the concourse buildings that are going to house the toilets and concession stands. Below that is the 85,000 square feet of academic space that's going to be accessed off that grade level. Here's an elevation of the south and north sides. So again, the back of the scoreboard, the steps up to the South Great Green Plaza, and then the stair accesses, the planes, if you will, they're going to access the concourse elevation, which is going to occur right here. The north side, again, open to campus, pilasters, right where my hand is. Again, past that gate line is going to be the North Great Green Plaza, and further from that is going to be the stadium terrace seating that I described earlier. And again, the plain type architecture that we've described in previous meetings. So now we're going to get into the images that we presented last time with the updated heights on them. So again, this is the view taking down the Whitcomb extension. Same images that you saw at the last meeting. And again, related to the building to the left, plus or minus 25 feet, it's a one-story building above grade. And the top of the concession stand, again, 45 feet, 7 inches above grade are the two new dimensions. The 123 feet 5 to the top of the light structure, and the 81 feet 4 to the back of the bowl were discussed at the last meeting. The next image is on the pedestrian way, again looking down towards the south on the pedestrian way. So there's the image that was presented last time with the updated dimension just of that concourse building at 45 feet 7 inches above grade. This is the image looking down Meridian. And then the scoreboard in the background at 94 feet above grade. This image has not changed since the last presentation. An image here identified by the blue dot looking down Pitkin. To the west, and again 117 feet 6 above grade at the center. Related to the dormitory buildings at plus or minus 45 feet above grade at the peak. This is a image looking down, sorry, I'll take a step back. This is an image looking down West Lake Street. So you'd be looking west. Same image again as last time. With a marker for the top of the light pole at 30 feet above grade. Again, that's relative to the 38.1 above grade at that south corner, and the 72 feet 10 above grade to the back of the bowl on the west side. An image here taken looking towards the east down lake. Again, same image as last time. To give some context to the image, again, the 81 feet 4 was presented last time. The 50 feet 7 inches above grade was presented last time. But again, you see to give some scale to the image, the light pole at 30 feet above grade, and then the stop sign at 10 feet above grade. So again, a little further down lake, you can kind of see the scale figure, if you will, of the light pole at 30 feet above grade, and then the top of the scoreboard at 94 feet above grade. And then further down lake, a little further, that same light pole at 30 feet above grade. And then again in the distance, it looks shorter, but that 38 feet 1 inch above grade, again because it's in the background of the image. And then the scoreboard in the foreground at 94 feet. So again, that's just the real quick update on the scale diagrams. The diagrammatic plans and elevations, again, that I think the black and whites that everybody has. And then the 2D elevations, and then the updated images with the updated dimensions before we get into traffic and parking.
Do we have any questions? Does that cover what people had last time or anything additional? Okay, great. Thank you, Elgin.
Sure. So this is Curtis Rowe and Scott Sorensen. I know I was going to mess that up. From Kimley Horn to talk about traffic and parking.
Good evening. Again, my name is Curtis Rowe. I work with Kimley Horn and Associates. I'm a traffic engineer. We're based in Denver, Colorado, and we're happy to present to you our results from the draft traffic and parking study prepared for the CSU football stadium on campus. This is just a draft study, and to be more efficient, that draft study has been submitted to both CSU and the city of Fort Collins. We have been receiving comments over the past couple weeks from their review, and so now we're also interested in presenting the report to you, to the board as well, and receiving your feedback and comments to the study. Some of this information was provided in the last meeting, but just to summarize again, our analysis began November 9th of 2013, in which we did some observations at an existing CSU football game. CSU Rams played UNR, that I call them UNR, but Nevada Wolfpack on that Saturday. And the total traffic generated during that game was 4,090 vehicles. The reported attendance of that game was 15,234. The peak hour entering volume was 1,618 vehicles per hour. And the peak 15 minutes, we always look at the peak 15 minutes for analysis, was 474 vehicles. So that shows you from the peak hour and the peak 15 minutes that the arrivals were fairly uniform over that peak hour. We did a vehicle occupancy survey. We asked the traffic data collection company to actually observe at 2 gates, 2 of the 5 gates, to see how many people were within vehicles. They weren't able to determine in all of the vehicles how many people there were, and it was just a sample in which they collected 500 data points. The survey sample came in with a vehicle occupancy of 2.3. The actual vehicle occupancy was calculated at 2.8. Both of those are in the range that we would expect. Actually, 2.5 to 3 people per vehicle is typical for a stadium. So the calculated vehicle occupancy is as we expected. 37% of the traffic arrived during the peak hour, arrived during a common peak hour. So that shows that that's just a little over a third, that the arrivals were spread out over more time. So people were actually heading out there for the game and spending time before the game, getting lunch or tailgating if that's what they did, or just spending some time there. Every time I've gone to a CSU football game, we go early and even play catch out in the parking areas and such. So with the kids. Exiting volume or exiting traffic was a little bit different. We had a lot more exiting right after the game ended. So that's shown from that. The peak hour exiting volume was 2,858 vehicles. And so that represents 66% of the traffic. So 2/3 of the traffic exited within that peak hour. Also, I should mention too, you probably recognize or know Scott Sorensen was here last time, and so he's up here too to take notes because we expect to hear some comments and questions, and we actually want your input. And so, as we go through this, feel free to even stop us and ask some questions, and so from that. But all right, so then for now, the new proposed on-campus stadium. Of course, we've talked about that before, but these are our assumptions. The new stadium would have a seating capacity of approximately 40,000. The vehicle occupancy that we assumed then for this stadium was 2.6 persons per vehicle, a little bit less than what we calculated from our Hughes data collection. It's in the range of the 2.5 to 3 people per vehicle that we would expect. Also, what that does, that vehicle occupancy provides the same trip generation and parking generation that the Hughes facility has. So we're looking at the same amount of traffic, just factored up from 15,000 people to 40,000 people. Mode split, the traffic study actually looked at a 70% mode split of vehicle traffic. We have received comments from the city and CSU since submitting that they believe that may be high, especially since this matches the Hughes Stadium data. And so we also provided just for this, for your purposes, to see what a 60% mode split would be. You see that would be an additional 4,000 spectators that would be expected to arrive by other means. And so from a range, we believe that it would be about 60 to 70% arriving by auto. 25 to 30% would walk or bike. And then half of those we think will come from people that are already on campus, residents that live on campus, otherwise also too just other people that happen to be on campus that day for other functions. And then from a transit perspective, we think that approximately 5 to 10% will use transit. The traffic study assumed 5%. I think that's a very, very low number. We've received comments too that they think that the city believes that would likely be higher than 5%. But to get that percentage higher and to get more people to the stadium by use of transit, there's some communication and work that needs to be done with transport in terms of improving their service to the stadium. We kept the same entering and exiting. Oh, yes, sir.
How do you all calculate the amount of people that you assume are going to walk or bike?
So it's based upon mode split industry standards, and it's also based upon the people that live in close proximity to the stadium. And so like in this case, we would expect that an on-campus stadium would generate more walkers and bicyclists than, say, Hughes, for example. And so there are a lot of factors that go into that, but it's from existing data collection at Hughes and then modified to what we think will happen with this stadium based upon other industry standards. Yes, ma'am.
You have these percentages, and do you ever go back and verify what you guessed at? I mean, the numbers that you guessed to be true. Do you go back to some stadium that you built and verify that the numbers that you thought it would be really are those numbers?
That can be done. That's a before and after study, and we do those. But when we're doing a planning study, of course, there are a lot of assumptions that go into that. And we want to make sure that our assumptions are as accurate as we can be. And we look at a lot of data that, in terms of trying to determine what that appropriate percentage is up front. And so, we want to be conservative. And so this traffic study has been prepared actually very conservatively. But we don't want to be so conservative that we are requiring that CSU provide all these infrastructure improvements that aren't necessary. And so it's a balance between those two when we're developing assumptions. And so assumptions is a great point of, it's an opinion, and so based upon other input that we've received from the city and CSU, we likely will be modifying that with our draft study.
I was going to wait on this until you talked about parking supply, but it might apply now, and that is the entire study is based on Saturday as a game day. In my experience, CSU has an evening game, weeknight game once a year, and the better the team, typically twice a year. So we're looking at data here about something which would be maybe 2/3 of the time true. Would a night game impact what you're talking about here in terms of, let's say, the split of walking and driving? And obviously, when we get to the point of talking about parking availability, we'll need to know specifically what is the difference between weekday parking availability and Saturday parking availability. And I don't see that in the study, but maybe you can make some projections.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that to answer the first half of that question, the percentage of walkers, bicyclists, transit would likely be higher on the weekday. You have more population on campus during the weekday. Classes are active, and so if you have a night game, students would stay, faculty, staff. So a lot of people are in downtown, and so I think from that end, Saturday, you think about your Saturday, typical Saturday, more of those trips would likely be home-based trips to the stadium, and so I think on a Saturday you'll see more vehicle arrivals than you would if it was a weeknight. Then the second part of the question, if you could remind me.
Well, later on, when we talk about parking
Oh,
availability,
perfect. Right, yes.
we'll need to consider parking availability on weekdays as well as on Saturday.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I didn't miss your question. Yes, sir.
If we go back to playing Thursday nights, the labs on campus run till 11 o'clock on Thursday night, and most of the labs are within 150 yards of this proposed site. And of course, people would having to be arrived during rush hour. So while there may be more people on campus to walk to a game, you've also got more people on campus going to labs and classes till 11 at night on Thursday. So it really seems to me at some point we need to model one of these things for a Thursday night game, because both the parking and the traffic and the effect of noise on campus is going to be qualitatively different. And when we built Yates Hall, that was the only way we managed to create the capacity to go back to 3-hour labs, which are the standard for most of these big courses. And like I said, they run till 11 o'clock on Thursday.
Curtis, as a matter of procedure, would you rather get through the presentation or take questions as we're going along?
Either way, I'm at the pleasure of the board, so if you would rather that we did it this way, that's fine. Otherwise, yeah, we can go through the slides and answer questions.
Mark, I'm wondering if Mark, because you probably know better than anybody, when's the last time we've had a Thursday night game? It's been like a decade, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Tyler, I'm going to roll through my mind here. It's been a long time, and it's likely to be a long time. I'd say the chances of us, given the television schedule or the television contract we have right now, a Thursday night game, the chances are too slim and none. Yeah. Too bad. Those were fun.
But I think the question does beg, what happens when there isn't a Saturday game? We haven't looked at traffic and the impacts that go with other events that may occur on different nights of the week. So I think it's one of the pieces that might be missing is what happens with different days.
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
The reason I brought that up was just the comment that
Yeah.
we have one or two every year, which just like Mark said, it's been almost 10 years, I think, and it might even be more than that now that I think about it. Yeah.
Well,
Why don't we
in my
procedurally,
records- Go ahead, sorry.
Curtis, procedurally, why don't we just ask questions as we go?
Okay.
I think this is going to take a while, so if somebody has a question they're interested in and have to wait an hour to get to it, they might lose it then. So I would suggest, why don't we just ask them as we go, as we're doing?
Yeah, I would say the better we get, the more Thursday games we get. And I'm hoping we would get better. Yeah, down the road. And so I think we really need to seriously consider what happens when you have the traffic in Fort Collins, which exists now, combined with traffic going to the stadium on a Thursday night. 10 years ago, the traffic in town and stadium traffic could probably commingle pretty easily. Now they will not commingle, period, unless there's some serious preparation, and maybe even working on game times to make sure that games take place after rush hour. You're going to have a lot of problem with rush hour traffic, for instance, on Shields. Right now at 5 o'clock, it's virtually impossible. So you're probably going to have to go back and look at what traffic exists in Fort Collins now on a Thursday and see what will happen when you put game traffic on top of it. And just assuming we're not going to have that game, I think, as the mayor says, probably not a good idea.
I'd add to that, though, it's not just football games, too. They're talking about having other things that could potentially be during the week. And so one of my major concerns as an employee is that a lot of the 64 to 100% of the lots that you have on here as being potential parking spots are at capacity right now with faculty and staff. And so if you have an event on a weeknight where you've got faculty and staff trying to leave and you've got people coming in, there's potential that these lots are already going to be full. So that might not be a ultimate solution for parking.
Right, I mean, our analysis looked at Saturday and Saturday midday for games, and, we evaluated the actual capacity of the parking lots for Saturday afternoon. And so that was during spring campus when we did that research. So it is true that, a weeknight game would change that dynamic. Understand that there isn't, of course, weeknight games planned, but there could be events, and, it's something that could happen in the future, obviously. You never say never, so.
Yeah.
I wanted to address some of the mode splits that are there. The 5% for transit begs the question, our transit system only allows 700 people to ride on transit. And if you're talking over 2,000 people riding to and from, there's no way that we can accommodate that without increases. So there's a key piece that this can't happen unless something else happens. So in that analysis, I think we have to take a look at that transit split and what it really means involving other ways of getting there via transit, and whether or not 5% is really realistic. If it cannot accommodate it, if it's part of what you're trying to accomplish, then we need to have percentages that say we can get 10% of them on if we do this or other modes. But I think that really has to be looked at as a realistic number that maybe isn't too realistic as things stand now, because we aren't transporting that number. So, that's a key piece. The second piece, looking at the walkers and the bike, the pedestrian pieces, I was concerned with the reports that I saw looking at the numbers that you had there. One of the places you put was that nothing would happen over on Elizabeth and Shields, that there were 0 bicycles and pedestrians that would come out of there on a game day. I think that isn't logical to me. And I'm pretty sure that CSU must know the numbers of currently pedestrians that moving along Laurel and moving along the perimeter on the outskirts coming in. There must be numbers of pedestrians and bicyclists, so that the numbers, which seemed awfully low, I mean, they were numbers down near 20, 30 people riding a bicycle coming from the perimeter into the campus. So I'm not sure I understand the methodology that went with the pedestrian movement into campus. You know, the internal is one thing, but coming into campus is another.
Right, and we, I'm sorry.
okay.
And we prepared the campus-wide traffic and parking study, and so we do actually have that data, and we prepared that as part of that study that we prepared last year. So we've been working with CSU on that data, and we have weekday campus-related activities for pedestrian and bicycle. One thing to keep in mind relative to the bicycle is that that's showing the volumes that we think are going to cross there. We were looking at the bicycles through that area, and if they are coming up to Shields and then coming down Shields, they're actually not in that traffic movement, and so they're not shown crossing that intersection. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't have had some crossing there, because there are good paths and connections through campus. Scott and I have actually already talked about that. We did receive that comment from the city as well, and so that is something that we'll be modifying or revising with our draft.
Because they could be exiting that way as well.
Right, correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, and then the last part of this slide is just to show distances from the proposed stadium here at campus, and walking distances away. So, you know, the proposed stadium is between Lake and Pitkin right here along Meridian. This represents the quarter-mile radius. Then this next color, I'm a colorblind traffic engineer, so I don't know what these colors are, but this next color, I see the line, is half-mile radius. And as you can see, that encompasses quite a bit of campus, and also the student housing that occurs out here to the west of Shields. You know, the next ring boundary is 0.75 miles, or 3/4 of a mile. So you can see from that, 3/4 of a mile is definitely a easy walking distance, easeable walking distance for our patrons to a stadium. We typically see people walking 3/4 of a mile from parking. And then the last one shows to a mile, and what you can see there is that, you know, the South Campus areas are within about a mile walking distance. Some of these parking areas that are right here shown, that is the NRRC, and we'll talk more about them a little bit later here in our presentation. So parking demand and availability. Based upon the mode split, if we see a 60% vehicle arrival, we think that an at-capacity event parking demand would be 9,231 spaces. If we're closer to a Hughes-type facility, and what that generates, we think then the parking demand would end up being about 10,700 parking spaces. Today, there is approximately 10,358 parking spaces available on the main and south campus. So it's close to the demand, and actually a couple years ago prior to construction, the parking that was available on campus would have met that demand, except that, you know, we're not accounting for the demand that's there already. With the stadium and with some other proposed projects at CSU, there are additional parking lots and spaces planned to be removed. Lot 240, that's the parking lot to the west of the stadium. So the proposed stadium's here. Today it's kind of an L-shaped lot, if you're familiar with that. There are 636 spaces removed with the stadium. We think that 256 of those spaces can remain, though, the furthest northwest part of that lot. Lot 505, which is directly under the footprint of the stadium, would be removed. There's 470 spaces in that lot. Lot 515 is also underneath the stadium, so that would be removing 205 parking spaces. Painter Lot 547 is a parking lot where a new building is proposed. Comment that we received from CSU is that There is new construction that would occur there, and that would remove 193 parking spaces. Animal science, there's an expansion occurring there, which would remove 139. Gifford lot, which is directly east of the stadium. It's this lot right here under the hand. That one, there would be 18 spaces removed with a proposed chiller that would be located on that lot. South Drive, there is parallel parking along the south side of South Drive, and there is angle parking along the north side of South Drive. We are proposing that we would remove the angle parking on the north side of that South Drive, which would remove 160 spaces with the stadium. And so we're looking at a total removal of 1,821 spaces expected due to the construction of the stadium as well as some other CSU projects. So that means that the parking availability on Main and South Campus would be approximately 8,500 vehicles. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a question, not being a CSU employee. And this goes to a little bit the question about during the week also. When I go there, there's never any place to park because most of them are A, B, C areas and that kind of stuff. Is that only 8 to 5? Where later in the night that wouldn't be affected? And are you counting that on Saturday, or are those not included in your numbers?
This is the entire parking provided at CSU. So this is the entire inventory, minus restricted spaces for police, some motorcycle spaces. We're not counting those. So this is the entire inventory at CSU.
So to follow up, so when it's a restricted area, by a letter for either staff or a student or whatever, does that go off at 5 o'clock? Or is that restricted all the time?
We do have the parking map here. It does vary by lot. The A lots are, most common, I guess. Those are from 7:30 to 4 Monday through Friday. And so the restrictions applied for weekdays for that. The meters, the pay spaces, the pay to park, those are 7:30 to 4 also on weekdays. And then the other lots, there's posted times, it says, so those would be individual. The QW and X lots are 7:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. The Z lots are 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. And then the Moby Arena lot is a special event lot. So that's what they have currently. So in terms of Saturday the parking is open. And so, we looked at the inventory and we looked at the demand, but we looked at all the spaces that would be available. Short answer. Okay, so just to continue on, just as a reminder, that first bullet, so with the proposed construction or anticipated construction, there will be approximately 8,500 parking spaces. We did a spring semester evaluation of campus, and we have determined that the Saturday demand is 2,300 spaces. So if 2,300 spaces are going to be occupied just based upon Saturday functions, because of course CSU is open, people are studying, and there's staff there, and so that will drop the available parking spaces down to 6,200. Meaning that 6,200 spaces then are available, what we would assume to be available for an event. As mentioned previously, the demand for an event would be 9,200 parking spaces if we get a 60% vehicle mode split, to 10,700 spaces if we're looking at a 70% mode split. So the existing supply that CSU will have would serve approximately 58 to 68% of the demand in the CSU lots. It also then means that we would need an additional 3,000 to 4,500 spaces to equal the demand. And that is if that we were planning to serve the demand, the parking demand on campus. Looking at stadiums in other locations for other universities, these percentages are actually very good. They're in the range of what campuses strive to provide on campus or within close proximity. You know, CSU here, we're looking at a 40,000 seat stadium, which is great for the school, great for the campus. But I mean, if you think about it too, relative to a lot of the, you know, the major sport programs that have football stadiums that are like 80 to 100,000, you know, obviously those campuses can't provide that high level percentage of parking available. And so they look for other means, other modes of transportation. They look for other parking areas, and they allow other parking areas. And so, you know, that's really a decision for CSU and the board to determine, you know, how much parking they want to provide and, you know, what is the equal rate of return. Yes, sir.
I gather the philosophy then behind parking here is to have people park as close to the stadium as possible. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, other universities don't have the same parking philosophy. Kind of depends on what the philosophy of the university is. Minnesota, their philosophy is to capture as much revenue as possible from parking, according to the folks in neighborhoods I've talked to up there. And the city makes restrictions on how many people can park next to your house and whether you can have people park in your restaurant to go to the stadium and so on. Their philosophy is the university wants virtually every dollar of parking revenue related to an event at the stadium. Okay, Baylor appears to be headed in the opposite direction. They're going to provide minimum parking evidently around their stadium, and their philosophy is people need to park where we want the people to kind of be influenced. We want them on the campus, and the campus is, of course, across the river and across the interstate from where the stadium is. And we want the people to park where the businesses are, and they're not by the stadium, they're downtown. And so the philosophy at Baylor appears to be, and it seems to me might have been worked out with their city council, and that is that at Baylor, everybody has a 25-minute walk to the stadium. And they come from someplace where we wanted them to be. We wanted them to be on the campus, we wanted them to be in town. We didn't want them to be in a big lot right by the stadium, like Mile High, for instance, right? That kind of thing. And then there's universities which simply, maybe we're in this situation, don't have much choice in terms of picking a parking philosophy. I think in Lincoln, Nebraska, that's what happened. I went to school there. You know, that program just grew. What could they do? And so their parking philosophy is any place we can find it. And they get a tremendous amount of business in their downtown area because the parking garages downtown all fill up with cars. All right, if we follow the closest to the stadium philosophy, which appears to be our philosophy, what we're essentially saying is, you know, we really don't want people parking in the parking garages downtown because we're going to put parking that's closer than that. And we also don't want to have an outlying lot where people are isolated from everything. They're isolated from downtown, and they're isolated from the campus, and they're given the choice simply to park in a lot, get on a bus, go to the stadium. But it seems to me a good idea for whoever's in charge of creating this structure. It'd be a good idea for them to have a discussion of what parking philosophy do we want to follow. Do we really want to follow a philosophy that says everybody as close as possible to the stadium? That's only one philosophy, and it may or may not be a very good one.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's relative to that. Both Scott and I went to the University of Nebraska, so we know that system fairly well. Yes, ma'am.
Does this take into account any of the conversations that, or the information that Fred from CSU provided about the new parking structures or anything like that? This is just what's existing, right?
Right now, that's correct. Yes, okay. This is what's existing, but that's a good segue into this next slide.
One last question before we go to the next slide. Does it take into, because this is just lots, right? So if there's, I mean, I know just south of the Hilton, there's a huge field there that is used for nothing, but, you know, there was talk at some point of, you know, being able to put 2,000 cars right there. you know, this obviously doesn't take into account those as well, right?
That's correct. It's just existing lots and existing garages, because we have the Lake Street garage, of course. So it's just those facilities. And so really, then, you know, what we did was, you know, Scott and I looked at it, and if we're going to try to accommodate the parking demand, you know, where potentially could that come from? So that first bullet is just a reminder. We need an additional 3,000 to 4,500 parking spaces, depending on the mode split, if we're going to be 60 or 70% vehicle arrivals. So these are some options that CSU could consider. While we were doing our Saturday data collection, we observed that at the Natural Resources Research Center, there is a lot of parking adjacent to those buildings. And as you know, it's a pretty large facility. Well, on Saturday, they had very minimal activity. They have approximately 1,200 parking spaces in those lots, and over 1,000 of them were empty during that Saturday afternoon. So we think that if CSU would like to approach them, and if they were able to work out an agreement with NRRC, they could accommodate an additional 10% of the demand for parking at an event. And as shown on that radius map, that would be within 3/4 of a mile of the stadium. So cumulatively, that means then that you'd be looking at 68 to 78% of the demand served if you just were able to use those lots. Then to your point, we looked at some additional areas or spaces that could be available, and one of them, as mentioned from CSU, was the tennis courts complex at South Campus. Adjacent to that tennis courts complex, there could be 1,000 surface parking spaces that could be either paved, or it could be remain, you know, in its existing state. And if that parking was provided, then that would accommodate an additional 9% of demand. We looked at that facility based upon a recommendation from Fred, and that's CSU land, so that would be more easily to come by. So that would take our parking supply to 77 to 87%. Then I'm sorry?
I had two comments. One, finishing up where Carl had started. I think this is part of what at least the city was looking for, and what I hear Carl saying is the alternate parking that a plan for, not next to the stadium, but satellite locations and the projection. I would assume that's what part of this is, but maybe it can be expanded to other areas that kind of feed into the transit system, and moving people from auxiliary lots farther out in the city and utilizing the transit system. And I think we haven't seen anything of that nature in the report. And the second piece I wanted to add in is the parking availability and the need was based on your vehicle occupancy survey that you did at the Saturday game, and you utilized that 2.3 people per car. But when you did the report, you moved that number up to 2.6, guessing. Well, by increasing the number of people in a vehicle, you've decreased the number of automobiles that would be coming into campus by 1,400 parking spaces. And I think, you know, understanding the character of who drives and how they go to the stadium, I guess I would like some kind of logic with the 2.6. I know you said that you guessed that it was closer to 2.8 and you averaged in, but I don't know that methodology is a strong basis for coming to the conclusion, because if we have to deal with 1,400 more cars, it's part of the parking situation, and I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that's something that we'll clarify in our traffic study. The actual vehicle occupancy at Hughes for the game that we counted had a vehicle occupancy of 2.8 persons per vehicle, so we're actually decreasing it based upon this study to 2.6. The 2.3 is based upon a survey sample in which the data collection company observed. They stood at 2 gates. They were able to get almost 500 vehicles, but they were only able to record the vehicle numbers if they could see in and actually count the people. And so any of the cars that actually had more people, they weren't able to get an accurate count. So we provided it. It was information that we collected. We thought it was useful. But the actual vehicle occupancy from that Hughes game was calculated at 2.8. And we'll clarify that in our traffic study. We realize
Because
that we
it
need to.
does make a difference,
Yes,
three
yes.
hundreds.
So that's a very good point. Yeah, we'll
310,
clarify that.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it assumed, and maybe you don't know, that all of this parking is going to be free?
Yeah, we didn't consider that. You know, that's good next steps, but I suppose there's probably a lot of different opinions based on that if you talk with people at CSU too in the parking and facilities, but.
Free for faculty and staff though, right?
Right, yeah. We'll make that recommendation. We'll make that recommendation. But, so anyway, then the last two, those are possible parking structures, working with the, working with CSU on the overall campus, traffic and parking study. You know, the master plan, through the next 10 years identifies 16,500 parking spaces on campus. If and when that occurs, of course, then, you know, that number of parking spaces would be able to accommodate the demand. A couple of the first ones that we think may go, based upon input from CSU, is that there is a possible parking garage at the engineering lot. That parking garage would provide 1,500 parking spaces. However, that parking lot would go onto an existing surface lot, and so you wouldn't get the full effect of those 1,500 spaces. You would actually get a 950 space gain. So there was an existing 550 spaces on that lot already. If that parking structure were built, then you'd be able to accommodate an additional 9% of the demand of parking. So that would raise it from 86 to 96% in that range. So we'd be getting close to accommodating the full demand on campus. And then the last one is Bay Farms parking garage, and that's kind of in the area that's to the south. I think in the area that you had mentioned too. You know, there's a floodplain that runs through there close by, but the parking garages would be just north of the NRRC, and they're looking at a parking garage of approximately 1,100 to 1,700 spaces. I'm not sure that range, but that's always the range that they've provided to us. That would accommodate an additional 10 to 15%, depending on which size parking structure was constructed there. You know, that those structures would go into an empty lot, and so we'd get the full effect of the gain of parking spaces. And so with that 10 or 15%, depending on 1,100 or 1,700 parking space garage, we'd be looking at demands of close to 100%, or even, you know, providing more than the supply at 106 to 111. One thing that Bay Farms parking structure would do is it could eliminate the need for the NRRC. You know, if you entered into agreement, if CSU entered into agreement, you know, maybe in the future it could eliminate that, right? Or could use tennis court site for a while for overflow parking for the big games, because of course we're looking at a 40,000 full capacity stadium with these demands. So it could eliminate that overflow maybe at the tennis court site.
Could I ask about including the reality of each of these proposals? For example, the engineering lot parking garage, what's the reality of that being built in time for the stadium or use with the stadium? I don't know where that falls on CSU. If we're including it as a possibility, what is the realm of reality as we approach these solutions? And I think that's an important factor when we consider where's parking coming.
I mean, I don't know that we know the answer of what, other than what Fred has talked about. You know, kind of these are the, and the feedback the university has given in the last month with the city, in the city meetings, that these are the most likely to happen first. I think it's certainly something, as we start to think about what recommendations might this committee make to the university, that I'd like to, you know, I think it'd be nice to hear, do people like these ideas of kind of satellite or off-campus lots as priorities. You know, maybe a recommendation is that you know, strongly feel that that garage needs to happen concurrently during construction of the stadium so that it is available. Those are kinds of things I think we should consider when we talk about what goes into recommendations.
I think the challenge on the master planned parking garages in the Bay Farm area for the Shealy subdivision neighborhood, I keep forgetting my terms as to whether it's a floodway or a flood something other than a floodway, but that's right down the core of what has to handle all of the flood from Spring Creek. And at least my last look at the city's maps on the origin of flood risk in the Shealy subdivision is that it's all back up coming out of the Bay Farm that doesn't clear under the railroad tracks, that it's not the initial flood that's going to get us, it's if it's not going to clear fast. Now, so I think from the perspective of the Shealy neighborhood, parking structures down there make people very, very nervous. Now, I know that the university has master planned this as ones that would be designed not to displace much water, but the only way, and whether or not that's politically credible as opposed to engineering credible, because those are two quite different things, is one matter. But the other matter is that the only way that works, assuming it can work, is if you don't use it in any, use the ground floor in any time when there's a possible flood damage, which runs, I think, through September.
Okay, moving on, just some other recommendations relative to parking. We are recommending wayfinding signing, specifically to the lots of South Campus or the areas around South Campus, if those are to be used. You know, to find the NRRC area, to find, you know, the parking around the tennis court sites if that's used. And so this graphic here just shows, you know, in a simplistic way where we think we'd need to direct those folks. You know, the proposed stadium is here on campus. This is the CSU campus. And so, you know, traffic will be driving Prospect. We'd like to, you know, get them directed down Center Avenue to get to these places. We also see a benefit to have signing down on Drake to get them up into these areas as well as over here off Shields. There's a possible shuttle route to South Campus is something that we thought of, and we're interested in hearing the board's input relative to that. You know, as shown on the walking distance map, the NRRC lots are within 3/4 of a mile. That's a walking distance. The South Campus area around the tennis court sites and such, that's getting into the mile range distance. And so this shows what a possible shuttle route system could be to serve the demand of parking for those south lots. When it's a nice day, maybe the fall, early September and October games, you know, you might see more walking, but, you know, football, of course, we play that in all weather, so there'll be certain games where, you know, maybe the shuttle route would be more likely to be used, but we think if it's provided, definitely people would ride that. Yes, sir.
This is, I think, more about pedestrian and bicycle traffic, although if you build these parking areas down here and people choose to walk rather than to take the shuttle, if there were to be a shuttle, it would become relevant. And I think that this is not only for your study, but particularly for the people who are from the city here. I understand that there is some discussion of trying to poke a access point to the bike trails into the Shealy subdivision from the east. And whereas currently the way you get from the Shealy subdivision to the bike trails is through the west over the importation canal and then over by Shields. I really think if the stadium were to proceed to be built and we were to have a heavy emphasis on parking down here, that one of the things that could help protect the neighborhood is to not poke the bike trail through to the east out of the Shealy neighborhood, because otherwise you're going to have hundreds, if not some thousands of people cutting through the neighborhood to get to the stadium. So I think, once again, if we look for ways in which these interdependencies can help make something like this work, if we build a stadium in that location and if we put all this parking down here, then I don't think it's prudent in terms of protecting the neighborhood to create access into the neighborhood from the east, because then people are just going to pop over to Whitcomb and come up, dropping their beer bottles both ways.
Yep, good comment. We marked that down.
I also want to point out, if you're talking about heavy traffic on Center there for parking, it's also a major pedestrian and bike thoroughfare, and you ought to consider additional traffic, police officers or other control there, especially because right hooks are a major factor in bicycle collisions.
Yes, very good point. And we have a slide that shows that information coming up too. We'll make sure we note that.
The new student shuttles on campus, do we know how many people they could accommodate to possibly serve this purpose?
They're not 60-person shuttles, I don't believe. But I don't know that capacity. We calculated headways based upon the demand. For arriving, we think that a 10-minute headway would be sufficient for shuttles. But departure, you're looking at a 5-minute headway. And if you can get 60-person buses, some of the larger buses like that Max out there, to get up and down the street, that would be beneficial just to, especially for the departure crowd.
Can I give you a quick summary and maybe have you correct me if I'm wrong? It appears that without building parking garages, you're 2,200 parking places short. Is that correct?
Yes.
On a Saturday, right?
Yep. And that is assuming that we're using NRRC and the tennis courts?
Okay. How much if we don't use NNRC and we don't build garages?
Okay. So that's this number here shown in this top bullet. We need an additional 3,000 to 4,500 spaces.
Okay. Potentially 3,000 to 4,500 short?
Correct.
Okay. And the only neighborhood restriction you're talking about is neighborhoods to the south?
That's what we've heard from the desire of that neighborhood. It's not to mean that's the only
It's the
neighborhood.
desire of our neighborhood too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think
we're
that-
easily as close as they are, and I can imagine if you've got 3,000 cars loose looking for a parking place for a football game on a Saturday, it'll be a problem. Make it a weeknight, and it'll be a real problem, for sure.
There are 2 additional neighborhoods that have done permit parking, and the city is going to be contemplating other neighborhoods as it bubbles up. I'm not sure what the timing is on those, but...
Well, I mean, the need for permit parking for the entire year for a 6-day problem is...
understand, permit parking is not a perfect solution either, but...
Yeah, I mean...
But I think that they were contemplating the permit parking as being the obstacle for
Right.
parking in the Shealy neighborhood.
One thing you should consider is game day restrictions in neighborhoods. If you talk to the city council, they may think that's a good idea. But it's done in Minnesota. And remember, in Minnesota, of course, they want all the revenue for themselves. So
right.
They don't let anybody park in the neighborhoods because that's their philosophy.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're still talking about a significant number of cars that are not yet accounted for. Do you have recommendations if there are not garages built, and if there is not use of an NRRC?
We are providing recommendations that they restrict neighborhood parking, and so it's at the accesses to those neighborhoods, and so that's provided within. Otherwise, here's 4 possible options. This is a draft study, and so we're gaining input, and so, just like from CSU and the city, we're interested in hearing, the board's opinion about these, and yes.
I always like to see a fallback. If this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and we have it on Thursday, then what do we do?
Do you have some suggestions, or the committee?
Well, I
suggest,
game day parking restrictions.
Oh, absolutely. I
in
think
the neighborhoods
I
around.
can't imagine that not
Definitely
being a part
suggest
of the
that.
recommendation.
And I'm not worried if they park further away, like they park in the parking garages downtown. that's what they intend for them to do in Baylor. That's what they end up doing in Lincoln. And it effectively puts that crowd into a position to spend some money in those areas. Your Bay, what's it called?
Bay Farms.
Bay Farm area, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like an outlying lot. They'll sit, they'll go there and they'll walk the stadium and they'll get there and they'll leave. So it's probably not going to do anybody downtown much good in terms of improving their business for that day.
I mean, it'd be interesting what do others think about downtown parking, and, certainly you're going to want to feed as many folks onto Max as you can.
I think it
Subject
builds,
to what the mayor said earlier about
Yeah.
capacity issues that we've got to deal with.
the easiest answer is to talk about mode shift. If we're talking about 60 to 70% travel by car, well, change those numbers to transit pedestrian movement, and you've solved some of the parking issues, which went right back to where we started in the beginning, talking about maybe a more creative design on how you get people movement into the stadium. If it's coming from outlying areas, your idea of location is key to that. The satellite areas, whether it goes out and we're working with I-25 and the visitor center that starts at Prospect, and we shuttle them in. If we move into the downtown parking garages and feature events there, if we work on the shuttle systems that come from different areas or pregame parties, because the other key piece in what we're talking about with the stadium, game day is one thing, but other days, and I couldn't help but look, the title you put on here was multi-purpose stadium. And that speaks to me of other things going on with other events that have major and then secondary uses. And that requires different kinds of parking situations, different kinds of modes that may go into it. And I think that creativity and that piece of coming up with some other more effective ideas other than just moving cars in close to the stadium might be a key way of looking at how do we solve parking people movements. And are we talking, someone talked about not using center at all as a vehicle movement. It becomes pedestrian, you get your car to the lot, that's it. There's no traffic back and forth coming out of it. Utilizing traffic operations to make movements in and around the campus. The bicycle boulevard idea, pedestrian boulevard's the key. I didn't see any of those kinds of ideas, and I think that would be really clever. Anyway.
I think that's correct. It would be important. I think they can speak for themselves, that they're trying to calculate worst case scenarios and make sure that we've thought about where do you park people if we can't figure out a way to get more people onto transport, or we can't convince people to walk or ride their bikes. I think certainly the city, the university, this group all have a common desire to see more folks walking and biking into any event, whether it's a football game or another event.
But see, that works with a plan. If you have the plan there and you're planning for it, I think it feeds right into it.
Sure.
And those ideas come and they work in the large scheme of things. That's.
Roger, some of us went to watch CSU play Alabama last year, and that's a kind of a suburban community. And one of the things they do, and they get 102,000 they stuff in that stadium, and they provided parking. They worked with the local mall owner, any place where there's a big parking lot, but we parked at the local mall, and they had bus after bus after bus, and they charged everybody $10. And they cut off all the streets, and you drove right up to the stadium. It was almost no stopping. I mean, these buses kind of had priority. Same thing going out. They were lined up. There was 30 of them, lined up, and you get on your bus, and you go back to the mall. It was remarkable. how well that worked. And so, given what we're going to have with the mall, even Front Range Village, I suppose, but the mall for sure, trying to drive traffic, drive business, get people to where, I think the university should certainly look at some sort of an arrangement with the Foothills Mall and buses and all of that.
And they have a parking garage.
Pardon me? Yeah. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? There's a parking garage, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
and a
there you have
tunnel
it.
to access.
Now, Saturday
that.
afternoon, I mean, everybody, they're either at Macy's or at the Ram game. Come on, folks. Go to the Ram game.
Oh, Mark, to that point, I mean, there's a lot of people who come up from Denver, right? And we got the Ranch and Budweiser Event Center out there with a huge parking lot. I think there's a lot of options for overflow parking we just got to find out what CSU wants to do, and then I think a lot of recommendations can be made. So.
And right, and keep in mind too, the master plan eventually shows 16,500 parking spaces on campus, and so, these could be options that are needed in the early stages of the stadium with at capacity events, but then, as the campus grows and additional parking garages are constructed on campus, then more and more of that demand would be served on site.
I don't want to be a broken record, but this isn't as much about parking as it is about moving people in and out of the campus and how you do that. I mean, parking is one element, but moving the people in and out, I think that's what this is about. So how do we get them in and out, and where do we put them to do that? And to focus simply on parking places does a disservice to the stadium to begin with, our multi-purpose stadium, and moving the people around Fort Collins, because it's far bigger than the number of parking places you put on campus. It's how we move the people in and about the city. And your traffic studies look at Mulberry, they look at Center and Shields, and all the vehicles that'll be there, and how are they going to handle it. So, I'd really like to see that push in on, say, we're moving people, and as a key element of our transportation.
And I think I think that is absolutely correct. I think again, you have to think of what the scope of this, what Kenley Horn was hired to do, is to look at traffic and parking and make sure. I think we want to try to make sure we can keep folks from parking in the neighborhoods, and that we can provide a place. I think your ongoing management, game day strategies that the city does now for Hughes and any other big event between the university and the city of how do you encourage people to not come in and use those parking, but walk, bike, park at Foothills Mall. That's a great idea. Park downtown and use transit. So that's ongoing that you're going to constantly be revising to try to improve those ratios.
The last meeting, I brought up a question, and I was told that CSU didn't have you consider this, but subject of tailgating. Certainly, you've went to Nebraska. You're familiar with it. I think you made the statement that before the games you toss balls and things like that. So certainly some tailgating can be for designated areas, but what percentage of football fans tailgate, and how is that going to affect? I see no mention of that at all here.
Right, and that's a good segue to these last four bullets, and I think we've been talking about these. We're recommending that they provide parking information with the tickets, when either through the, internet, website, other media, just so that the public knows to park. We have the neighborhood parking restrictions, and we recommend those. To your point, we are recommending that CSU look at the parking lot size for the different facilities to fit the demand that's available, and that would include, whether tailgating would be allowed or provided, and if so, in which lots, and so those need to be identified. It would be good to match the size of the facility, the parking lot, to the demand of that type of use. That also goes with, where season ticket holder parking is available, VIP, ADA accessible, all of those different types. And then, of course, they'll need a signage inventory to redirect people when they attempt to park at a certain location so that they know if the parking lot is full and if they're charging a fee, how much that fee is, and then even just the type of parking. So if they're restricting that to season ticket holders only, so that that's clearly identified. Yes, sir.
But you're not answering part of my question, and that is, certainly you've dealt with college situations like this enough. What percentage of people do tailgating?
Well, I mean, one way that you can look at that is just based upon the arrival and departure patterns. We see that 1/3 of the traffic arrives during a common peak hour, whereas 2/3 of the traffic departs in a common peak hour. So the difference in those is the people that are going there to spend some time prior to the game, and so it's it could be anywhere up to a third, 33%. That's the difference. Why we see a difference in the arrival and departure patterns for an event.
I guess the question to clarify on that, Doug, I mean, you have tailgating in regular parking lot, which I think at CSU is most of the people. You do have a smaller section where you have RVs and that kind of stuff, but that's clearly in the minority of the people that do it. But the people I've seen that do tailgating, Mark, correct me, if you go up and down the rows, it's just normal parking, and they tailgate behind their car. So that would be, I would think, a normal parking lot. I don't think they give any extra space in the normal parking for that. Where you have the RVs and the place close to the stadium is a different issue. I wouldn't think those numbers would be very high, though.
Well, they haven't been. I suppose it's all in what is sold. I mean, depending upon lots of different things, what kind of space might be available. I mean, the university would probably want to. I mean, it'd be part of the revenue stream to say, this section here is going to be for RVs, and we're going to charge, Nebraska, they get like some $5,000 a year or something. I mean, it's crazy. How much is it, Carl? It's a lot.
I don't know.
What those people pay for park their RVs, right up next to it. But it's, but assuming not that, but there's going to be some of that, but it's limited. But yeah, most of the people just pull their top up and sit on the back of their, and get in the way of the people trying to drive in, but it doesn't take up more space.
Bob, I was at Kansas State last weekend. I just wanted to go check out their stadium while I was there, and how their parking lots are set up. They actually have basically an emergency access lane drawn between, and there's about 4 feet behind where somebody parks. You can be within that emergency access lane and a tailgate. And it was a great setup, and I took a picture because I wanted to, if anybody wants to look at it, you can see it. But it's a great way to do it. Very organized how they have it set up, and I think it's a good best practice for something like some of these lots. So.
It's a good point. One of the things we have to do here is give a recommendation to CSU on how to improve on the design within the parking. Do we need to designate an area, which they've talked about, for that type of activity? Do they need to charge more for it? Whatever. This group is the group that's supposed to give them recommendations on what we think they should do to accommodate the different types of people that'll be there and to use the space the most effectively. So it's a good point to bring up. I don't think it's a large number currently. As Mark says, hopefully that will grow. But what I've seen in the past is you're playing touch football, you're doing barbecues, you're doing everything in the normal parking lot. And that space isn't any larger whether you park and go in or whether you stay out there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that occurs just because, like for us, when we come up to a game, we're coming up from Denver, and so, we don't know how long our travel trip is going to take, and so we want to make sure that we don't miss the beginning of the game, and so we leave early, and so where do we spend that extra time? We spend that at the stadium because we want to get there, and so, we'll spend that time there, go into the stadium, get lunch, and I think a lot of that is what's occurring too, so. Yes, sir.
One of the challenges, I think, with this, the parking design having the parking capacity on all different corners of the stadium or all different sides of the campus, is if people do get to a lot where they don't want to park because they charge too much or it's full, that becomes a real problem with the traffic pattern because then you have people driving the entire perimeter around. One of the things that we were thinking about is a recommendation that people get assigned their parking area or know in advance that they have a parking area in a certain parking place to really decrease that. And part of that is if you want to tailgate, this is the place you go. Maybe you pre-purchase your parking with your tickets or something, because that could really reduce the traffic mess on game day. People know where they're going and they get a parking place where they want it.
Yeah, that's great. That's good information, and that can be
I
provided
totally
with the
agree with that.
tickets.
The athletic department would do that. But we're gonna, okay, we've figured out, we think we're gonna have 500, it won't be that many, 200 spaces for RVs, and we're gonna charge $500 a year to park there. People that wanna do it will buy them, and so I think that's exactly what happens, is you charge for it, and then those who don't have that park wherever they park, and they still pay, but it's out, where they'll mess up the traffic.
Okay, so I guess like that wraps up the. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This is really a very professional report, and I'm sure that there will be individual pieces of it that I'll probably come back and ask a follow-up question on. But there are two more general suggestions I'd like to have. One of them follows up on the mayor's earlier comment. This is really a report so far about managing the traffic and managing the parking if we happen to have a Saturday football game. And yet it is entitled about a multi-purpose stadium. I think at some point, whether you handle it in the titling or the narrative, whether there is an additional separate report, I think that you might find it easier, I think we would find it easier, if there was a report on, this is the way we're going to handle Saturday football games, because there's all one whole set of traffic parameters and parking parameters with that. This is a way, if we happen to have a football game on a weeknight, that's the plan for that. Then, just as we talked about, or I talked about, when we listened to the discussion of noise the last time, where the judgment was it wasn't the crowd noise, it was the PA. Well, then suddenly when it comes to managing noise, the issue isn't football, the issue is any event where they use the PA. So a separate thing which is about non-football multi-purpose events might turn out to be one of the easiest ways to manage the competing things that you've been asked to do. And so in that sense, you've got your core plan, which is a Saturday game day for football. You pivot off that for what happens if we have it on a weeknight. And then having handled football, both Saturday and other times, we have a discussion about what's it look like if we're talking about commencement? What's it look like if we're talking about women's soccer? What's it look like if we're talking about a band event? You may find it easier to separate those out. That's the one general comment. The second general comment I would make, which I think is particularly relevant to those of us who represent neighborhood groups, and one of the issues involved in this entire conversation is about compatibility and impact on neighborhoods. I think it might be really very useful to say, okay, what's it take to protect the West Side residential neighborhood? What's it take to protect Shealy? Look at the major residential neighborhoods around here and look at how the flow of traffic, the flow of pedestrians, all of it affects that particular neighborhood. And in that particular case, as in the example I gave a little while ago, it will matter a lot to my neighborhood whether or not we leave the access points the way they are or whether we poke a public access through to the southeast, innocently thinking that will help get people to the bike trail. But in fact, what that may do is produce 2,000 people walking through on game day. And so if you switch the focus to how is everything related to this stadium going to affect Doug's neighborhood or whoever, people who live in the West Side, Shealy, and organize it that way. Because right now, even though this is an advisory committee that's supposed to talk about impact on the neighborhood, there's not a single piece of this that takes the neighborhood as the unit of analysis and asks how this is going to affect them.
Okay, all good points.
One more thing
Oh,
before we
sorry.
leave parking. It won't take long. You've done a lot of parking studies, I presume, and as a company. Have you ever done a study where a university wanted to put parking for an event into 50 separate lots spread around that university? That's essentially what we're looking at here. We've got 50 little pigeonholes that we're going to put all this parking into. Now, have you done parking at a university with a similar situation, and how did it work?
It probably more commonly happens at downtown stadiums, like for the baseball stadiums where you have multiple parking facilities, and so we run into that more, for those locations. Universities typically try to plan major parking areas and having several of those major parking areas provided. It is true that the efficiency of some of those lots, may not occur if you have, along Pitkin Street there on the east side of campus, you may have multiple lots with smaller availability. It will require additional staff to be able to, flag people into those lots and that there's parking available, or also signage to record that that's full. But yeah, each campus is unique, and so that is definitely a unique consideration here with CSU.
Well, that was going to be the second aspect of my summary, which was a long time ago. And that is that we're looking at a pretty abnormal parking situation here at CSU in terms of what's proposed and what can be done.
Just one other thought. Have you looked into the possibility of if it would be beneficial to stagger parking times and if that would help with traffic flows and that sort of thing? So certain parking lots open, maybe 3 lots open 5 hours ahead of time, and then the next 3 open for, to kind of direct people specifically to those lots that happen to show up at those times, and whether or not that would kind of help the situation. Kind of to Jerry's point about people coming and saying, I'm going to just go to the next lot, and, causing traffic hang-ups and that sort of thing.
They do that a lot of times at stadiums when they want to control the amount of traffic close into the stadium, and so you might have parking lots open earlier for close-in parking, and then as those fill, you close those lots, or the other lots surrounding then the stadium open, so you're keeping traffic away from the center. I don't know specifically if that would benefit CSU, based on, gentleman over there's point relative to, trying to get traffic into the lot. I think that, we wouldn't want to create another level of complexity based upon where parking is located here at CSU. So I think it's best probably that, parking is available for anyone. And so, if they're here and available to get a space, then we want to get them parked in that location. Okay, so then, so that's stopped cars. Let's talk about then how we get everybody in. The traffic study looked at the vehicle trip generation. It's the same as that parking demand of 10,743 vehicles. We think that this is conservative. More than likely, it's going to be less traffic than this. This actually follows the same trip generation characteristics of the existing Hughes Stadium. But we wanted to look at a worst case scenario and just to see what impacts if the same trip generation were to occur with an on-campus stadium. And so 37% of the total would arrive during a common peak hour. And so for an at-capacity event, 40,000 spectators, we're looking at approximately 4,000 entering vehicles. The peak hour exiting volume would be approximately 7,000 vehicles. That's 66% of the total exiting trip generation. So with the traffic study, we evaluated 39 intersections. The good news is that 31 of them work fairly well, work well in that, we aren't recommending any improvements. There are 8 locations, though, where we think that improvements would benefit the city. In some of these cases, these are things that would benefit peak hour traffic. Also, keep in mind that we're not introducing football to Fort Collins. Of course, the CSU Rams play here already, and go Rams. So a lot of these intersections are located outside of the campus area, and so the impacts relative to The stadium location is independent of whether or not these improvements are needed. The good case in point is this first one, Mulberry Street and College Avenue. What we saw from our traffic volumes is that turns from Mulberry Street, this is Mulberry Street here, and this is College Avenue, is that eastbound and westbound could benefit from dual left turn lanes. Right now there's a single left turn lane. There is an additional lane here along the north side of Mulberry, and then out here in front of Sports Authority there's a wide sidewalk. So potentially those lanes could be shifted northward and you would be able to get dual lefts in there. We looked at a distribution of traffic to accommodate, the average arrival. Mulberry Street, of course, would be for those that are arriving from the north. Maybe this would happen more when CSU plays Wyoming, maybe. But, that's a potential improvement. I don't know if the city has discussed that. As part of this, we are going to talk with the city regarding these improvements and to see if these are feasible and whether or not these are improvements that they've thought of even just to serve the existing Hughes Stadium traffic and or just peak hour traffic demands. So as mentioned again, this need is independent of stadium location. The second one, yes, sir.
You're saying that Mulberry need is specifically independent of stadium location?
Yes.
Not sure I completely agree, given that the stadium location right now is more prospect-oriented, but I'll let it slide for now.
Yep. I mean, actually, the existing one's along Prospect and the proposed one's along Prospect. I mean, I think there would be some modification in distribution, but, just based upon the traffic itself, it would be needed for either stadium, more than likely. If Hughes was at capacity, so, right. The second is Prospect Road and I-25, and this would be for the folks leaving, heading back to Denver. What we found here is that the eastbound approach to the I-25 southbound ramp could benefit from a free right turn lane. More than likely, this would benefit peak hour traffic, morning peak hour traffic, even afternoon peak hour traffic for people from Fort Collins heading south, heading to Denver or anywhere else. And so this improvement is also likely needed for Hughes Stadium, just based upon the exiting traffic funneled through Prospect Road, leaving Hughes if Hughes had an at-capacity stadium. Drake Road and College Avenue. Really, this one we ran the signal timing here and have provided a recommendation that right turn overlap phasing be considered. And so in non-traffic engineering terminology, that just means that the right turn approaches to the intersection would get a right turn arrow, so you'd be able to turn right. You'd have a green arrow, so for example, this northbound to eastbound movement would have a right turn arrow, while these westbound dual lefts occurred. To do that, though, you would have to restrict U-turns. There are businesses in here with restricted access. However, there is shared access with all of these other properties, and so access would be possible from the other corners or from the other lots. That's a relatively inexpensive signal modification if it were possible to implement that. Harmony Road and College Avenue, everybody knows about this intersection. Working with CDOT, CDOT has identified this corridor to provide three through lanes in each direction. And so this intersection would benefit from 3 northbound and southbound lanes along College Avenue. College Avenue, of course, is US 287, so it's under CDOT jurisdiction. And they've planned for that future improvement. This need would be independent of the stadium location. Elizabeth Street and Shield Street, this is on the west side of campus. We provided this recommendation to serve the campus demand as well, so this is needed just for campus demands on the weekday. And what we found here is that the eastbound and westbound approaches would benefit from dual left turn lanes. Today, the eastbound approach has a shared through left turn lane, as you can see here in this aerial. And what that means is that that intersection runs with a split phase, which is an inefficient operation of that signal. Split phasing is always not desirable, and so trying to eliminate split phasing improves the operations of that intersection. And so to do that, what we've recommended to CSU to consider, and we'll work with the city relative to this, is we only need one through lane across here. This is the parking lot for Moby, so there isn't any through traffic here. One through lane across would be sufficient. The westbound approach here of Elizabeth Street has 2 lanes. So to redesignate it, this one through lane as the second left turn lane, the dual left, so we shift them north and then mirror that on the other side. And we would be able to remove the split phase and wouldn't require any widening on this side of the street where you're right-of-way constrained. And again, that recommendation was included with the overall campus study. Prospect Road and Shields Street, we found that this intersection would benefit from a westbound to northbound right turn lane. This was recommended with the overall campus study as well, to serve the demands of the turns there just in typical morning and afternoon peak hours of the weekday. This is an improvement that probably has the most direct benefit to an on-campus stadium. This is something that would not be needed if the stadium stayed at Hughes, and that is where we are recommending northbound and southbound dual left turn lanes at Center Avenue and Prospect Road. So this is Center Avenue, this is Prospect Road. Today there's a single southbound left turn lane and a single northbound left turn lane. As these academic village areas redevelop on the west side of Center Avenue, we recommend that additional laneage, that you look at additional widening there so that you can get dual left turn lanes in both northbound and southbound in that location. And then the last one is Prospect Road and College Avenue. So Prospect Road, of course, east-west, College Avenue, north-south. There's already a lot of lanes here. This is one location where College Avenue or US 287 already provides 3 lanes northbound and southbound. Just based upon the volume of traffic, we noticed that eastbound dual left turn lanes would be beneficial. A separate northbound right turn lane would be beneficial. So, of course, from this aerial, you can see that there's not really any room to widen this intersection. And so, this was one step in our analysis. And so, obviously, this intersection, we needed to look at other solutions. And so that is police officer control. So these are the intersections or locations where we are recommending police officer control. Half of them, there's 8 here, half of them would be for departure traffic only. And then the other 4 would be for both arriving and departure. So to go through these, South Drive and Shield Street, this location here, that's because South Drive, which we'll talk about here in a minute, is that we are recommending that South Drive allow 2-way traffic on game days. There's a proposed closure of Meridian Avenue between South Drive and Pitkin Street due to all the pedestrian traffic. Of course, here's the proposed stadium location. And then in addition, Pitkin Street would be closed from the Engineering Academic Village fire lane and Whitcomb Street. And so this section of closure for pedestrian traffic, the only way to get out of these parking lots here would be to allow 2-way traffic on South Drive. And so by allowing 2-way traffic on South Drive, of course, there isn't any control at that intersection of South Drive and Shields. And so for departure only, we believe that police officer control would be beneficial for an at-capacity event. Then we have South Drive and Meridian right here. That's mostly due to the number of pedestrians that we think are going to be crossing there, to help them cross while controlling traffic into and out of these parking lots. Pitkin Street and Shields, so that's this location. Same reason, it's an uncontrolled intersection. There's not a traffic signal there. Lake Street and College. Over here, that's a stop controlled. Prospect Road and Shields. That's due, we don't believe that there's right-of-way available for a westbound right turn lane. Just to handle the traffic in that location, police officer control would be beneficial. Prospect Road in College. Oh, I skipped one, sorry. Prospect Road in Center Avenue. Prospect Road in College, which we just talked about those. And then also potentially Laurel Street and Meldrum Street. And that is if the parking structure up at the engineering lot goes in. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is the one I was suggesting. If you are going to really use the parking lots down there off of Center Drive, that you would probably want, or I would suggest, traffic officer control on the entrances to those parking lots because of the high volume already existing in bicycle traffic and likely higher volume of pedestrian. The other thing, all these analysis of police officer control and turn lane improvements and everything else is predicated on your analysis. I know that the city transportation staff's been talking with CSU about adjusting that analysis and making sure that we're speaking the same language. So I just wanted to highlight that some of these conclusions might I would wonder, maybe I'll rephrase it. Will some of these conclusions potentially change in the final draft of this report based on that discussion?
Yeah, they very well could. Right now we've taken a very conservative look, and I think based upon comments from the city, maybe too conservative, and so we'll be able to, look at a reduction in traffic volumes and maybe spreading traffic around more. And we'll see then relative to that. But yeah, these are just draft recommendations from our study, so that is a good point.
And I think once again, you need to prepare a weekday scenario for both parking and traffic. And obviously the traffic scenario will be considerably different during a weekday from what you're looking at right now.
One question on pedestrian crossing. Did you look at like under overpasses maybe from Center and Prospect and Elizabeth and Prospect? 'Cause it seems like if pedestrians had flow through and, there wouldn't be as much traffic stopping, especially obviously non-game day would be important, but just in general to and from campus, that flow would help traffic tremendously.
Absolutely, and that is one reason why we looked at police officer control at this intersection, Prospect and Center, as you noted. We did discuss the possibility of an underpass. We learned that from our discussions with CSU and working with CSU on the campus master plan that there is a potential underpass of Prospect Road in that vicinity, and so that is discussed, and it's just another item that, for further consideration, to see relative to what would be needed or thoughts. One way of reducing the pedestrian crossing here is the shuttle system that we discussed as well, and so that's also provided for consideration, to see what you think about that. We looked at existing signal timing, Saturday afternoon signal timing, wherever possible. We were provided the synchros traffic model from the city of Fort Collins, so we actually took all of our data that we collected for Saturday and put it into their existing model. And so we maintained the existing timing for that. There are 13 intersections that we noted that would benefit from a change in that timing. That just means providing more green time for certain movements because it's going to have more traffic in it than other ones would on a typical Saturday. And so this is just a list of those that we would provide to the city for consideration, for some special event timing. Some of these are repeat intersections. Actually, most of these are repeat intersections that you'll see that we recommend improvements, police officer controls, special event timing. If you provide special police officer control at an intersection, they're actually running the timing for you because they're allocating who has the right of way, and so therefore then you wouldn't need to implement special event timing at that intersection. So it's kind of an either or, but we wanted to provide a complete list to show you, which intersections we think would benefit from that control. Pedestrian access, as mentioned from the previous, there is a proposed road closure along Pitkin Street. So Pitkin Street is right here, so just right to the north of the stadium. And then also a proposed closure right through there. Can I shake less? See if Scott can do better. But Pitkin Street and Meridian Avenue, both of those would be closed for pedestrian movements. And so with those closures, that will require bollards or barricades. It also will require a way for traffic to turn around. On Pitkin Street, if the fire lane is used, potentially that can be incorporated as a turnaround for anybody that tries to drive down Pitkin and then realizes it's closed. Then, as mentioned too, South Drive. We would recommend that South Drive would be converted to two-way. And so that's so that traffic, as mentioned previously, would be able to exit out of the parking lots to the east of Meridian Avenue. What that would do is it would restrict angle parking on game days. There's approximately 160 angle parking spaces there along the intramural fields. This is a aerial view along that north side of the road. There's a double yellow center line in there already that's shown on here, but so you would just need to restrict that angle parking on game days. In addition to that, right here at the intramural buildings, the intramural field buildings, there's buildings here. There's one location where the sidewalk has come out into the street, and there's some shrubs in there, and so that little aspect or that little part of that would need to be reconstructed with this recommendation for South Drive to serve two-way traffic. Other than providing that option, one of the other things that was thought of and discussed and would be interested in getting your input is that potentially Meridian Avenue, which is closed to vehicle traffic, could serve exiting traffic, northbound exiting traffic, during the times when that would need to be provided. That traffic could get up to Elizabeth then instead, and so that would be an outlet for anybody that parks in that location. And so that's an alternate instead of South Drive being converted to two-way. So that's pedestrian access. We looked at sidewalks surrounding campus, and we have a few noted locations where we'd recommend enhanced sidewalk, either improved sidewalk, some locations that don't have sidewalk, some where we need an increased width. And so the first one is a sidewalk trail or path from the CSU Transit Center. So the CSU Transit Center, yep, Scott's got it. It's up there in this, corner. It's up by the engineering lot that we've been referencing. That location right now, there isn't a direct path, but there's a lot of construction going on in that location. And so we're recommending that a direct path from the transit center, because we think a lot of people will come in from that to the stadium, be provided, just so that pedestrians don't have to walk through the campus core, because currently that's the way the sidewalk or path connections are provided up there. Additional improved sidewalk locations include Pitkin Street. It's on the south side between Shields and Summit Hall. Yep, so that's that location. Pitkin Street on the south side between Mason Street and College Avenue. In that location, there isn't adequate sidewalk, and that's over on the east side of campus. Yeah, right there. Lake Street, north side between Shield Street and Rams Crossing. It's just another location without sidewalk. Lake Street again, south side between the parking garage that's there in the U.S. Forestry Department. There's no sidewalk in that location. There's a parking lot there with multiple accesses, and so it'd be nice to have a defined sidewalk in that location. Then along Meridian Avenue, both sides, however, with the proposed street closure, that will likely be a pedestrian plaza, and so pedestrian movements would be very easily facilitated into and out of the stadium from the north. And then the last place is along Whitcomb Street to the south of the stadium, along both sides, so between Lake Street and Prospect Road. There is sidewalk along those. There's houses in that location, but the sidewalk varies in width. It's 1, 2, 3 feet. So very narrow sidewalks. Of course, being that close to the stadium, you're going to get quite a few pedestrians walking up and down that street down to Prospect Road, we anticipate. And so given the sidewalk width that exists there today, that pedestrian traffic would likely be walking in the street. One other option is we could consider the closure of Whitcomb Street between Lake and Prospect. Maybe it's only open to local traffic, just to try to reduce or eliminate the actual vehicle traffic in there so that pedestrians can access in and out. Something for consideration by the board.
When you're talking about sidewalks, you're quite right about Whitcomb. I walk up there every day and back. But the one piece you appear to have missed is the 20 yards between Whitcomb on the south side of Prospect eastbound towards Center, because that's only around 20 inches wide. And it's the kind of place where, unless the pavement is dead dry, you take your life in your hands trying to get to Aggie Village south. And it will be, some of this may be a function of how you use officers to direct pedestrian traffic as well. My hunch is you're going to want people not to go down from Lake to Whitcomb at all if they're going over to parking on Center Street, because getting up Prospect to the east from Whitcomb is, on either side, is very dicey.
Right, yeah, that is a good point. And that is our thought relative to directing traffic from the south campus areas, is that they would use Center Avenue up to Lake versus walking Prospect. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good point.
Just as an element of the conversation, you know, the city is engaged in the Prospect Avenue corridor plan and working with the West Central area. And that's in full swing. That goes from now until next February, with this being key elements because it takes in all of the sidewalk, the intersections, and all the pieces you're talking about. I would assume you've been in contact with the city on that, but it's major where the city's going with this, regardless of whether the stadium's built or not.
Right, and we've been in contact with Fair and Peers. They're the consultant that's working with the city on that project, and so we've provided information and data from our study, and so we are coordinating with them on that. Definitely, absolutely, that's a very good point. Okay, we're almost done. Transit and bicycle. We are recommending increased transport and max service. Obviously, you all provided that recommendation as well. It is important. We're looking at 5 to 10% of our arrivals to be provided by transit. Right now, the service rates don't allow for that, and so there would be a need for increased service. Bicycle lanes, there are good bicycle lanes, adequate bicycle lanes right now along Lake Street and Pitkin Street, and so we have good east-west connections. It makes sense because we are on campus, and so there are a lot of bicycles, a lot of bicycle traffic already, and so the campus has provided fairly well for those. One recommendation is that there are 13,000 bicycle racks on campus, and so they do a good job of accommodating those users. But we may need to look at the location of those. If a stadium goes in here in this location, some of those may need to be relocated to actually a location that would be convenient or more accessible for the stadium as well. So something for them to look at for that. And then otherwise, possible other improvements for consideration. I think this one did come up. Well, the shuttle to the South Campus parking areas, interested in terms of that, what the board thinks about that. If that shuttle system was provided to the south, along Lake Street on the Whitcomb approach, so this northwest corner of the intersection would be the stadium. There is a parking lane, and actually right here between the Gifford lot 520 and the Meridian Whitcomb intersection, there's a striped out area of parking, and so that would be a good shuttle drop-off location, pickup drop-off location, because we envisioned that the shuttles would come up center, drive Lake Street to the west, drop-off pickup occurs here, then they would turn south on Whitcomb and then back again on Prospect over to center, and so that would be their route. And then this point was brought up to the pedestrian underpass of Prospect Road. That's been something that CSU has considered in the past. I think just based upon campus expansion and the campus master plan, looking at additional parking structures to the south and along South Campus and the Bay Farms, you know, that would be something that would benefit not only the weekday campus arrivals and departures, but it would also be used by stadium traffic. And so next steps, and we took a lot of these, we wrote a lot of these down too from comments received from you tonight, and we appreciate those, but these are the ones that we thought of coming in today. But we would be looking at the partnership between CSU, the City of Fort Collins, and Transport. That would be important, and as we continue working through this draft study, we're working with CSU and the City of Fort Collins on this already. We're going to discuss potential improvements to increase capacity of MAX. Just that transit system in and of itself, we think, has a lot of opportunity to serve the demand of people to the stadium. We're going to discuss the addition of bus transit station on campus, what that means, and then a better understanding of a traffic plan for a Thursday night game. So questions, comments, input?
I'm wondering, in the time you were doing your studies, did you ever observe any trains crossing the major arteries in town?
Yeah. I don't believe so. Any of our data collection, I don't believe that we observed a train. Yeah, I mean, there was a 6 o'clock train that came by here tonight that we observed. So the, you know, obviously when that occurs, when a train comes through, there will be interruption to traffic. And so, yeah, that will be something that obviously Fort Collins residents know and understand from, you know, from that aspect. Yes, sir.
It may be in one of your handwritten notes and didn't appear in the list you typed up for the screen, but I was serious about the idea of looking at the major residential neighborhoods in town and treating them as a unit of analysis to figure out what the implications are for this. I'd also suggest that people might find it intuitively useful and helpful if you would compare what Prospect looks like on a Saturday game day with what Prospect looks like on a weekday rush hour, because that's the Prospect that most of us experience. And just in terms of trying to help people understand what traffic counts look like, I mean, I know in my own case there is a good 20-minute difference in how long it takes to get from South Whitcomb and Prospect to I-25, depending upon whether it's rush hour or not. And sometimes it's 25 and 30-minute difference. And so to have a sense of what the scale of the traffic looks like, and my hunch is that the most widely recognizable benchmark would be comparing it to what a rush hour experience would be.
Yes, absolutely. We can do that, and we actually have some weekday data already for the campus area master plan. We looked at a little bit earlier peak hour with the campus traffic because, you know, campus classes end sooner, and so we don't have the peak hour traffic. But with the model provided by the City of Fort Collins, we do have traffic information on Prospect Road, so we can definitely do that. One thing too is that Prospect Road, I know, is used to access the existing Hughes Stadium, and so one additional item that would be interesting to compare is what we think the increase of traffic is relative to this stadium being located on campus compared to what's going out to Hughes anyway or already.
This is just one person's hunch, and so it's not worth any more than that. But as a non-expert, it just seems to me that you've got 3 arterials that go all the way out to Overland Trail, pretty much, to get things to Hughes. And my hunch is that things will bottleneck in more towards campus sooner. So for instance, if the stadium were to stay at Hughes, I don't know why you'd worry as much about left turn lanes at Mulberry and College, because they're still going west. They're not going to turn south on College if they're going to Hughes. They're still going west on Mulberry. I'm just wondering whether or not by moving the stadium from Hughes in, whether that alters the way in which Harmony and Prospect and Mulberry work together in terms of actually getting traffic to their destination.
Yes, sir.
Kind of piggybacking on what Alan has said, some proponents of the stadium on a main campus stadium have said how much better it would be getting to and from it than what it would be for Hughes. And how many minutes have we spent talking about changes that need to be made, police officers, additional police officers that are going to need to be used, how many dollars are going to be spent on changes for an on-campus, a main campus stadium. You know, I don't think I'm the only one that has a hard time believing that this is not going to be just a major traffic jam on game days. And that in order to lessen it being a traffic jam on game days, we're spending this money for 6 days a year of possible problems here. We can talk about Tuscaloosa, how they handle their traffic. I've lived in Columbus, Ohio. I've lived in Columbia, South Carolina before living here. I know what towns are like when the culture is football. They're willing to put up with the inconveniences. But the people of Fort Collins, the citizens of Fort Collins that are so upset about the possibility of this stadium being built on the main campus, that is not our culture. And we're not so tolerant, and we're not willing to give up our lives on Saturday and the convenience that we now have in getting around town for something like this. So the impacts are going to be tremendous for this. And to lessen those, the cost is going to be right up there also.
Just to kind of summarize what you talked, correct me if I'm wrong, basically what you said based on improvements was that other than 2 Center Avenue left turn lanes, the rest of them need to happen anyway, essentially, right?
That's correct. You know, most of these intersections are surrounding within the Fort Collins area, and it is getting traffic to and from a stadium, and so it is independent of the location. We do have impacts more close into campus, so as you get closer to campus, that's where you're going to see a difference in traffic patterns. But if you're looking at any intersections exterior to Fort Collins, it's not as if we're just going to be introducing college football to the city. That exists today. And one difference is, you know, we looked at an at-capacity event. You know, the Nevada game that we did the survey, that was a 15,000 attended spectator event. So, you know, there is differences too, just based upon whether or not we had 40,000 people out at Hughes as well.
My concern is you will be able to get the traffic to the campus. The question is, will you be able to get the traffic into the parking? And I think what we are looking at here is a very abnormal parking plan. You're planning to put thousands of cars into 66 varied sizes of lots in an area that's about 24 blocks by 48 blocks. And quite frankly, I can't think of anybody, any university that does that. My guess is 3 years down the road after they've tried to do this, CSU will say, that just doesn't work. What we better do is park them at Hughes and shuttle them in. And that's the kind of situation you would have most places. They would look for a big parking lot someplace They would put the traffic in that lot instead of spending such amount of time and energy before the game to try to get so many people into so many tiny little lots. But the idea that there are 66 parking lots for the people for this game is just unbelievable to me. And how you're going to get 8,000 people into 66 lots, 8,000 cars into 66 lots in any kind of reasonable time, just seems, beyond my comprehension. Good luck.
Yes.
So on this, on your diagram for the parking as well, there's spots that haven't been identified, so will those be blocked off? Like, for example, around the oval, there's all spots, I don't know how many, but around the oval, outside of the administration building, in front of some of the other, buildings, there's some spots that you haven't identified on this chart, so are those gonna be blocked off spots?
Are those restricted even on Saturday? Are they
There's
Saturday
still, I
restricted,
believe
or
there's
are they
still
open?
like A lots or, pay for parking lots, or like Tony Frank's spot.
Right. Well, any of those that are restricted, we did not include those.
Only he can park there?
That's
And
right.
walk in?
Yeah, we wouldn't recommend parking in his space. So. But, yeah, any of the restricted areas, we didn't look at those specifically, so it was any that would be available. Like we kind of went through the list there, the ones that are restricted on Monday through Friday but open on Saturday, those would be available. I think the key to the several lots issue is really for the public to be able to locate them. Providing the information to the parking lots and where the parking lots are provided and what type of parking will be important, so that we can direct traffic into those lots. Otherwise, given that they're located around campus, that will distribute traffic around campus versus locating them into one location. And so if they can be utilized and if people are able to get to those parking lots, traffic can be distributed around campus. And so that's one positive about having parking located around CSU versus in, 2 or 3 rather large lots where then all the traffic would be focused.
My final comments start here. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I really think there's a lot of valuable information and that you've done, a really good job of gathering the information together for our use. It is a good report. From my perspective on the other side, and I don't know that this is a charge that goes to you, but maybe it's a message to Colorado State through this committee. I think the creative alternatives to arrival on campus is extremely important. That there are ways to get people to the campus other than driving them in and parking. So that piece I think is extremely important. The other area is, I don't know if you can produce this or not, but it seems to me there can be a bottom line that says, what is absolutely necessary to get this to work? For example, you've mentioned that you need 3,000 to 4,500 parking spaces. That's absolutely necessary. As far as the rest, your transportation, what absolutely has to happen with transit to make it work? What has to happen operationally, through either police or intersections? I mean, what has to happen? And I think there's a minimum there in order to make it function, and then there's a maximum or a wish list. And I think we can't overlook the fact, what does it take financially to make this happen? And I don't know that that's part of your charge, but I think it's questions that need to be answered as well. So that's my final comment.
Yeah, and that's a very good question and a good point. This study, I think, took it to about an 80% level, this draft. And then we got to the point where, really Scott and I were, asking each other what is it that we need to do here? And really we needed to get input from you guys. So we needed input from CSU, we needed input from the city, we needed input from the board in terms of determining which improvements that you would like to see, because there are a lot of options. You know, we discussed a lot of options in terms of, you know, what would be beneficial, so.
And that's hard with so many options, and,
That's right.
you know, which intersection takes the brunt and which one doesn't, and, you know, what's bottom line getting people in and out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Any more on that? Yeah.
Do you have a statistic for how many people are inebriated upon leaving the game?
No.
Not that I'm aware of. You know, it depends on location, I would say. At the University of Nebraska, we don't actually have alcohol sales on campus or at the, you know, at the university, so during the game. So, you know, at a location like that, you know, it'd probably be less. BYU, I would think, would be very, very low. So it would depend on the facility, and I think probably, you know, that could be best answered based upon your experience at Hughes Stadium. It would probably be, you know, relatively same, you know, similar to what you're seeing out there, and potentially the police staff would be able to, you know or provide that information too.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Other items, let's look forward to our next meeting. We'll have three main things we'll be looking at. Excuse me, has been mentioned. We'll have a second draft of what we did tonight. With more input, they'll take the input we have tonight, the city, CSU, and we'll have another look at that next go-around, which is on September 8th. We also have talked about having game day operations, a presentation on that. We've had a lot of questions about what's going to happen there, and we have a couple people that can give a presentation on some of the thoughts they have on that. Third thing is, we have to start looking forward to what kind of a recommendation are we going to give CSU. I think the charge of the committee is to give our thoughts on what would make it a better design than just what the staff could put together, given what we think is unique about this area. So you might start thinking about what that's going to look like as far as putting something together, because I know that'll be a good discussion when we get to that. But these are the items. We talked about a lot of them, and I'm sure there's differences of opinion on what would make a difference. But what can we present to CSU that they'll think about, which obviously they'll have the final decision on that. Yes, Alan?
The one thing, and it may just have been an oversight, we were looking at a revised, or asking for a revised version of the sound study, one that paid attention to the Fort Collins standards, one that took the day-long average, which basically had the effect of taking the amount of noise generated during a 4 or 5 hour event and dividing it by 24, that we were going to have a follow-up discussion of that. I would also say that off the top of my head, reflecting on what we've heard this summer, I would say the of all of the studies presented to us, the one that I'm seeing the least light at the end of the tunnel in terms of being able to manage is in fact sound.
Okay, Elgin has assured me that they'll have that information too. Okay,
We'll provide that at the next meeting.
okay. So we have a lot to do next time. You probably see on your agenda, September 8th, here at the same time. Do we want to do a 5:30, 6 to 9 again? Okay. Think about the recommendations though, and either bring them with you or forward them to Roger in the meantime, and we will spend some time on that. Okay, thanks for coming.